Hello and welcome to this edition of Desert Rose Adult High School News. I'm Crystal Rennell. A 1960s civil rights activist spoke twice to students here at Desert Rose Adult High School yesterday, once in the morning and once in the evening. Dr. Sonnie Hereford helped successfully integrate Huntsville, Alabama in 1962, 2 years before the Federal Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. With more on Dr. Hereford's visit, here's Brandon Ward.
The feelings of the blacks in the early 1960s in Huntsville, Alabama, where they were sick and tired of being sick and tired. Dr. Hereford explained why he got involved in the civil rights movement.
I wanted my children to get a good education, and I wanted my patients to have good jobs. I knew that if they had good jobs, they would be healthier because they could buy better food and they could buy their medications and they could practice preventative medicine.
Dr. Hereford also wanted his son to get an education in a school that had a white population because those schools were better than the ones African Americans attended. And after going to court to make it happen, his son and others did integrate white schools. Dr. Hereford says for the most part, African American activists got no support from Huntsville's white population.
There were a few that assisted in the movement, and there were some that were sympathetic but did nothing. And then there were others that were just sort of neutral, nonchalant. They didn't care which way it went. And there were others that were bitterly against it, about 60%.
During their struggle, Dr. Martin Luther King visited Huntsville, Alabama, to offer inspiration to the African American activists. That led to a stronger unity, which helped those pushing for integration to make Huntsville the first fully integrated city in Alabama in 1962. For Desert Rose Adult High School News, I'm Brendan Ward.
Dr. Hereford is also speaking at West Middle School today. Although Huntsville, Alabama was one of the first in the United States to integrate, Las Vegas was one of the last. With more on that story, here's Summer Woods.
They mostly worked in what was called back-of-the-house jobs in casinos and downtown Las Vegas resorts. Those are jobs that keep the casinos running, but that call for little to no contact with customers and guests. By 1955, the 15,000 African Americans living here comprised about 10% of the Las Vegas population. However, they were forced to live in a segregated section of the city called the West Side, which was located on the west side of the railroad tracks. It neither had running water, working sewage lines, nor paved streets. It was its own community with its own churches and schools, but African Americans were not allowed to buy or sell houses beyond the west side, and they were not permitted to take part on any of the entertainment the rest of Las Vegas had to offer. Just like most places in the country, casinos barred African Americans from gambling, attending shows, or staying in their establishments. That was a problem for the casinos because many of the most popular acts were African American. Nat King Cole, Dinah Washington, Lena Horne, and Sammy Davis Jr. all played major casinos here, but they had to leave through the kitchen right after their shows. In May 1955, the Moulin Rouge Hotel Casino, the first integrated resort, opened on the southern border of the west side of Las Vegas. Moulin Rouge was built to welcome African Americans who had been banned from the Strip resorts. President of the Las Vegas chapter of the NAACP, Dr. James McMillan, threatened to organize a citywide protest unless the city desegregated within 30 days of his announcement. The group worked out a compromise that lifted all Jim Crow restrictions and desegregated the city. As a conclusion of the agreement, which became known as the Moulin Rouge Agreement, African Americans were now permitted to gamble, to stay in Las Vegas resorts, and to attend shows. While then it would be more than 10 years before African Americans could live beyond the borders of the West Side and the city was fully integrated. The agreement came years before the countrywide desegregation. For Desert Rose Adult High School News, I am Summer Wood.
In the end, it seemed the only color that mattered to Las Vegas was neither white nor black, but green.